Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to this afternoon session, which will deal with the agenda item 3, which is the high-level update on the forthcoming consultations incorporating ComFrame text with revised insurance core principles. And we hope that and as Elise announced, that we are not taking the full time for that, and that we are then able to get back to the ICS discussion, as some of you still would like to have some questions or make some comments. The purpose of this session is to update you with recent developments and decisions made which have an impact on the public consultation of revised ICPs and ComFrame material, which will be launched in March for 60 days. And of course, that also will be important for the subsequent consultation. In particular, the following developments will be mentioned. It's the adoption of the so-called thematic approach across the 3 tiers of the standard setting, i.e. the ICPs, ComFrame, and the GSII measures. The integration of ComFrame specific material, specific to IIGs, into the ICPs. Then thirdly, the preparation of the forthcoming public consultation with integration of elements of the ComFrame qualitative field testing and how we plan to organize the consultation tool. Then next is the date of adoption of the revised ICPs, which being a foundation for ComFrame material. And lastly, the timeline for further developments of ComFrame and reviews of ICPs. Of course, it will also again give you the opportunity at the end to ask some questions, or if you would like to make some comments. The aim of this session is not to discuss detailed content-related issues to the specific themes and standard setting. So that's still work in progress. We will have a FSTC meeting starting right after this session here and tomorrow, and then we will also have further meetings, FSTC meetings, to discuss these matters end of February and later on in April and in June. The purpose is to prepare you to what you should expect in the next public consultation, and to encourage you to participate in those. In this regard, we will provide you with more details on how the consultation tool will be organized. We have put together some slides, and we are going through them, and with Catherine Lezon from the Secretariat will go through a few slides. Then Ryan Workman, who is the chair of the Supervisory Material and Review Task Force, will explain about the integration of this ComFrame text into the ICPs. And then Gregors Komanicki to my right will also then explain to you about the consultation tool and how exactly the timeline will work. So with that, I would like to pass over to Catherine.
Thank you, Urs. So let me start with some general considerations with respect to the thematic approach to standard setting. First, what do we mean by a thematic approach to standard setting? Well, it is a way of organizing the work on supervisory material by theme across the 3 tiers of standard setting, which are, as Urs mentioned, the ICPs, the ComFrame, so what is specific to IAIGs, and the GSI policy measures that are specific to GSIIs, as the name indicates. So the thematic approach is an approach also where the responsibilities for addressing those themes are allocated to the relevant specialist subcommittees at the 3 tiers, for the 3 tiers, and the central coordination and control of the quality of the drafting is to be done through an expanded role for the Supervisory Material Review Task Force, chaired by Ryan Workman, which was previously the ICP Review Task Force, but it has been expanded to the other 2 tiers of ComFrame and GSI policy measures. So that decision was made in 2015 to move to that thematic approach to standard setting. And as a consequence, the ICP revision timelines and the ComFrame work plan were amended to synchronize, to the extent possible, the key milestones for the development of such supervisory material by themes. So what do we mean by themes? There are a number of them, which include supervisor and supervisory measures, which includes supervisory cooperation and coordination. For instance, for that one, you have ICP 3 at the first tier and ICP 25, ICP 3 about information exchange and confidentiality requirements, and ICP 25 on supervisory cooperation and coordination. And then at the ComFrame tier level, you have the relevant ComFrame material about supervisory colleges, cooperation and coordination. And at the GSI policy measures level, you have the level of the crisis management groups. So all those 3 tiers are looked at together as one theme by thematic subcommittees, which are in that particular case, the insurance groups working group and the resolution working group for the crisis management group component. Other themes are enterprise risk management, capital adequacy, obviously, group-wide supervision, recovery and resolution, disclosure, and also 2 themes which do not have ComFrame materials planned for development, which are conduct of business, financial crime, and macroprudential supervision. So, as a result, the further work on ComFrame is done by those thematic subcommittees under also the consistency check of the Supervisory Material Review Task Force. And maybe Ryan would like now to explain a little bit more about the role of that Supervisory Material Review Task Force. Ryan.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Catherine. So the Supervisory Materials Review Task Force, or SMRF as we call ourselves, the T is silent. We've been involved in looking at some of our own material, ICPs, and then looking at the other working groups, ICPs and ComFrame material as they're being revised. I think as a while back, we kind of looked through the different levels of standard setting material and realized that there was a bit of difference between the structure and the formatting and ways to maybe make things better in line to help reflect the fact that the ICPs are the foundation for all insurers, ComFrame is for IAIGs, and the GSI policy measures are for the GSIs. So also in doing that, we've noticed a lot of consistency issues across all the different materials. So terminology being used different places at different times, terminology that should be the same is not the same, and things like that. So what we've been trying to do is go through and kind of be a second set of eyes for the different working groups and to point out things of inconsistencies, duplication and overlap and things like that. So hopefully in the end, you'll see that the IAIS supervisory material is more coherent and consistent, and hopefully kind of reflects a better work product of the association.
Thank you, Ryan. So a key outcome of introducing the thematic approach was to reorient the work to a more vertical perspective, as shown in that diagram, which is now, I think, well known at the bottom of the slide. It allows a more consistent and effective process for review across the 3 tiers of standard setting, a more efficient use of resources, and also an alignment of public consultations by thematic areas, which should allow you to better understand how and why the 3 tiers build on each other were relevant. So a consequence of that thematic approach is that thematic subcommittees felt the need to improve the presentation of how the ComFrame material specific to IAIGs builds on ICPs. As a result, the decision was made in 2016 to integrate the ComFrame specific material into the ICPs, making clear that it is specific to IAIGs, and Ryan will explain what it means. Ryan.
Thanks, Catherine. So hopefully most people in the room remember the old structure of ComFrame. The current version, the 2014, is still in that old structure, and we use that for the purposes of entering into the field testing phase. So it was a separate document which mostly just contained a lot of references or cut and paste of ICP text in order to provide the context for the ComFrame material itself. We had the three levels. There was standards, parameters, and guidelines. It was split into three different modules, the scope, the IAIG, and the supervisor. So I think that was kind of helpful as in the initial starts of drafting ComFrame, but then eventually as the work continued, there was a number of issues that were identified. First off, the lettering and numbering of the ComFrame material became very hard to work with, especially then in consideration of to what extent the ICPs would make any reference to ComFrame or in other papers, that it was very hard to keep up with the numbering scheme. There was a lot of confusion between the definition of what made a standard and what was a parameter, especially in comparison to how standards were defined in the ICPs. Some of the working groups in drafting and revising their material, sometimes, especially looking across different working groups, what was a parameter and what was a standard sometimes varied. So it kind of added to the confusion. Finally, some of the ICP material and standards and guidance were just repeated in ComFrame material as context. This also sometimes provided confusion. Some people would read ICP material in ComFrame and say that they didn't think that that was applicable to IIGs without realizing that they already were applicable because they were part of the ICPs. So that's kind of what led to the decision in 2016 to integrate the material into the ICPs so that the overlaps mainly could be reduced to the fullest extent possible and to show more clearly how ComFrame builds on the ICPs. So the format of ComFrame itself is moving from that tabular formatting into a narrative form, so it's going to read and look more like the ICPs do, and the numbering is going to be adjusted as well to be a lot more streamlined and easier to follow, but at the same time making it clear that it is numbering for ComFrame material itself. As far as being able to make sure there's distinctions between the material, the IAIS will be using some IT functionalities. For those of you that look at the ICPs online already, there's ways to look at them as a whole or drill down into standards and guidance. So the ICPs will be available as standalone as they currently are. There'll also be an option to look at the ICPs with the ComFrame material included, and then there'll also be an option just to look at ComFrame material in its own right. But obviously with the understanding that it won't quite read as well because a lot of the material all of the material is based on the ICPs. The working groups are in the process of merging the standards and parameters, either kind of figuring out if the parameters are already covered, given that the ICPs are there, or elevating the parameters to ComFrame standards, or else would it be more appropriate as ComFrame guidance? So that's one of the things that the groups are undertaking right now. Finally, the ComFrame standards, we try to be more clear on those and also better reflect the wording to be more consistent with how ICP standards are drafted, so that they're more an obligation of the supervisor. Finally, we've dropped ComFrame guidelines, and again are calling that ComFrame guidance. Again, lining up the classifications from across the different levels of standard setting material. So that just leaves the GSI policy measures, and those were developed a number of years ago. Obviously, a lot of the focus is on revision to the ICPs and ComFrame. The GSI policy measures are not really drafted in a similar format, and so the IAIS plans to address that after the adoption of ComFrame in 2019, to take a look at what material is there and how it can be better reformatted or refigured to better reflect the rest of the IAIS's standard setting material. I think we've got 2 slides that just illustrates just quickly the changes. So this shows on the old structure, it shows the old numbering, and on the right is the new, is an example of the new structure itself. So the ComFrame standards will be preceded with a CF with the numbers, and then an A to help show that they are based off of, this would fall under ICP 7.1, so you would have ComFrame standard 7.1A. And then the next slide, I think, shows how this would look within the material itself. So the end result is hopefully a better way to make sure people understand the relationship between the two, and that the ICPs are applicable to all insurers, including IAIGs, but that the ComFrame material then sets out the additional level of requirements and guidance to those to help with the supervision of IAIGs. So I will conclude there.
Thank you, Ryan. I will now address the preparation for the forthcoming public consultations in March 2017. In October last year, we decided to schedule the public consultations on ComFrame and ICPs that had been previously scheduled for November last year to March, in order to go out in an integrated and coordinated manner. That was notably to have the necessary time to review and respond to all the comments we had received during one pre-consultation related to resolution, and also to ensure consistency in taking the comments into account through well-coordinated feedback loops among all the subcommittees involved. Also to effect a seamless integration of ComFrame material into the ICP structure, as Ryan just described, and to facilitate also your future feedback across those thematic areas. So the package for the March 2017 public consultation is expected to cover the following supervisory material. Under the theme of governance, it will be only ComFrame material because the revised ICPs were already adopted last year before we moved to the thematic approach. And those ComFrame material will include the ComFrame specific material integrated respectively with ICPs 5, suitability of persons, 7, corporate governance, and 8, risk management and internal controls. Under the theme of the supervisor and supervisory measures, the consultation will cover both the ICP level and the ComFrame material integrated with that ICP level. So ICP 9, supervisory review and reporting, and the related ComFrame material, and ICP 10, preventive measures, corrective measures, and sanctions, and the related ComFrame material. Under the theme of supervisory cooperation and coordination, the consultation will cover the revised ICP 3, information sharing and confidentiality requirements, and 25, supervisory cooperation and coordination, and the related ComFrame material. Under the theme of recovery and resolution, the consultation will cover the revised ICP 12, which has to do with winding up and exit from the market, and the ComFrame material integrated with it, bearing in mind also that the idea is that ICP 26 on cross-border cooperation and coordination on crisis management is currently planned to be integrated with ICP 12 and 25. So Grzegorz and Peter will now, given the decision to integrate the ComFrame specific supervisory material into the ICPs, the question arose whether it was still a good thing to continue carrying out qualitative field testing of the ComFrame specific material only, given that now that specific material is integrated into ICPs. So we have spent sufficient time discussing and considering the pros and cons of possible options, and we came to a decision in that respect in November, which Grzegorz will now explain. Grzegorz.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, so as Catherine mentioned, in order to prioritize our work and to make sure that the resources on the side of the IAIS members and stakeholders are used in the most efficient way, it was decided not to field test the qualitative requirement of ComFrame, but at the same time to amend the process of public consultation to include certain elements of the qualitative field testing. And it will be done in this way that certain questions which were used in previous exercises of qualitative field testing will be now integrated into the public consultation process. And those questions, of course, will be a bit modified to fit the nature of the public consultation, but you can expect several questions on this process. And as in case of every public consultation process, there will be two options for respondents. They will be able to choose that all the responses can be published together with the IAIS resolution on the website, or they can choose for all the responses that they should not be published on the website, and they should be only made available to the IAIS members. And now Peter will say a few words about the impact on the confidentiality restrictions in this regard.
Thanks, Grzegorz. So what we are effectively doing here is it's the same process but via a different vehicle. So instead of going through the full field testing process, which then requires our members to go to Basel to review the material that comes in from the volunteers, which is held in a very confidential way on BIS IT systems. Now the responses will come in via the IAIS consultation tool. So I think the important thing to note is that you will still be able to tick that box that says that the responses are not to be put on the IAIS public website. We will treat those as confidential responses. So it will only be IAIS members that will be viewing that material. So if we can just go to the next slide. So we will have in the IAIS consultation tool, you'll be able to provide comments on each part of the ICP text and ComFrame specific text, and that will be applicable to all stakeholders effectively. But then there will be additional questions which we will identify for potential IIGs and supervisors of potential IIGs. So I think it's important to note there that we're looking forward to 2019 for when ComFrame is expected to be adopted. So there might be groups that currently do not meet the IIG definition who might be interested in this, and they will be able to answer as potential IIGs, and also the supervisors. So these will be the very similar questions, as Grzegorz has already pointed out, very similar questions to what we've asked in field testing. What we found is that the responses in field testing weren't particularly of a confidential nature, so we don't need to go through that process. And it will be much better for IAIS members to be able to review those responses whilst in their respective jurisdictions and not having to go to Basel to look at the confidential systems. So I think that's probably enough on that. I'll hand back.
Just to add that, to highlight that those additional questions, field testing related questions, will be only for the ComFrame material, not for the ICPs. but obviously when you will be answering those questions, you should consider ComFrame requirements in the context of the ICP's requirements. And also to underline that we will try to formulate those questions and then build the consultation tool in the simplest way, so there will be no nesting or branching of questions. There will be just going from one question to another in order to make sure it's also not burdensome for you to provide your input.
Thank you. So more generally, the consultation package is expected to include a cover note, which will briefly describe for each theme the background and the history of the ICP and ComFrame text, the general aspects of the changes and the major reasons for them, the specific areas in which feedback is requested, and also a table showing where the ComFrame text has been moved from the old to the new format. And obviously the revised ICPs and ComFrame text, with the ComFrame text being presented within the ICPs per the new format. Importantly, the reasons for the changes may be diverse, and notably the integration of ComFrame together with ICPs may result in changing the style of the text or deleting redundant parts of ComFrame, which are already in ICPs. However, content-related changes should not be directly caused by merging ComFrame and ICPs. So all the work on substance that has been done so far of ComFrame, of course, is still valid. There may be other reasons for changes, which are, of course, the outcome of a self-assessment and peer reviews regarding ICPs, the outcome of previous ComFrame field testing, or further considerations by relevant working groups, taking into account possible developments since the ComFrame and ICP previous language was developed. And of course, also the development of the ICS. So as a result of that thematic approach and of the integration of ComFrame specific material into ICPs, it was noted that the ICPs related to ComFrame may need to be further adjusted after being revised by the relevant thematic subcommittees for consistency with other parts of the supervisory material being developed, notably ComFrame. Therefore, we had a question which we tackled as to the best date for adopting ICPs, and that would, of course, trigger expectations of implementation. So we came to a decision on that in November, which is the topic of the next slide. Basically, you may know that when the instrument's core principles were last revised in totality in 2011, they were considered implementable immediately. That is, the ICPs were expected to be implemented with immediate effect once adopted and published by the IAIS. In 2013, we adopted a comprehensive program to review and revise those ICPs, and with no phase-in period, which means that we were planning to have ICPs immediately implementable. However, following adoption of the thematic approach and the decision to integrate ComFrame with the ICPs, it was proposed to reconsider the date of adoption of ICPs, which serve as a foundation for ComFrame material. And so in November 2016, it was agreed by the Executive Committee that for the ICPs which are related to ComFrame specific material, the ICP revisions will generally not be adopted until 2019, with adoption before 2019 being an exception to be duly justified by the relevant group. And the ICP revisions completed prior to 2019 but not yet adopted would, however, be made available on the IAIS website, with an appropriate notice that they are drafts endorsed by the Executive Committee, released for information purposes only, and subject to potential further changes before being deferred to the AGM for adoption in 2019. Of course, there would be a relevant explanation of the status of those ICPs when published on the website. So those revised draft ICPs endorsed by the EXCO and published might still be subject to potential further changes due to further work on other elements of the ICPs or ComFrame package. It is not the intention of the IAIS to treat those drafts as a basis for FSAP assessments, and there is no expectation for their implementation before their adoption by the AGM in 2019. So taking this into account, Grzegorz will now present the timeline of ComFrame further development and of ICP review. Grzegorz.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, so this is the simple timeline showing the main steps in the process of leading to the adoption of ComFrame and revised ICPs in 2019, at the end of 2019. So as far as this year is concerned, we are going to have public consultation in March and April. The material should be released at the beginning of March. And Catherine presented previously the scope of the consultation package. Then we are going to have another public consultation during summer in July and August. And this will be revised ICPs 2, also 18, 19, and 24. And of course, we expect agreement on ICS version 1.0 in June 2017. And we are going to have also the third round of public consultation in November, December, so at the end of this year. And we are going to consult revised ICPs 8, 15, 16, and also ComFrame material related to these ICPs. And of course, following finalization of revision of those ICPs, those revised drafts, as Catherine mentioned, will be published on IAIS website for information purposes. And during 2019, we will be continuing working on the ComFrame, and there will be consultation of ComFrame, including ICS version 2.0, and overarching consultation of ComFrame. And of course, it's not to present the detailed time frame for those next 2 years, but all those activities should lead us to adoption of the revised ICPs and the entire ComFrame, including ICS version 1.0 at the end of 2019.
Okay, I would like to thank Catherine, Ryan, Grzegorz, and Peter for the presentation and the explanation about our plans in respect of ICPs and ComFrame. As you have seen, we would like to do a coherent approach of the themes through all levels of ICPs, of ComFrame and the GSII measures. For the GSII, as explained, it's maybe more in the longer run, whereas the integration of ComFrame into ICPs is done now. It's not only about the themes, it's also with the structure, which is now more aligned, and we have using the same expression as Ryan explained when it comes to the standards and to the guidance. What you will see is that the ComFrame text is now much shorter than in the 2014 ComFrame draft, which was published in September 2014, and it's still available on the website. And the reason why it's shorter is, of course, the integration, where we decided not to repeat the ICP text in the ComFrame text. So that's also there falls away quite a bit of text. But also, in addition, I would like to mention that the text is ComFrame and the requirements of ComFrame is not anymore as extensive as it was, because some of the ICPs, which have been revised in the past few years, contain much more group aspects than as was available in 2014. I would like to remind you that in November 2015, we had revised ICPs 4, 5, 7, 8, 23, and parts of 25. And when you will look at the text of the upcoming ICPs revision now in March, that's ICP 3, 9, 10, and the integrated 11, as well as 12, and where some parts of ICP 26 are integrated, they are covering much more group aspects. And for that reason, that also falls to a certain degree or limits the text of ComFrame. It now should be actually much easier reading, and I think it was explained with the tool that you can access, then decide if you only look at the ICP on its own, if you like to look at it integrated with the ComFrame text, or even at the ComFrame text on its own. With the adoption date, which Catherine explained, I think it's important to see that we are also striving for a certain stability of the ICPs, that not the ICPs are changing every year, and so that gives also the members time to actually then implement in their local laws. And also another reason is that due to the continuous development of ComFrame, there might be small adjustments necessary in the ICP. Nevertheless, I think Catherine mentioned there are exceptions which might be possible, and one of them which might be possible is, for example, ICP 12, which is currently exists only of two standards, that's the exit and the winding up of the market. And here, as you know, we are working on quite expanding that in order to reflect also the newer developments and also reflect group aspects in that ICP. In terms of the consultation, also you have heard that we are trying to make this as transparent as possible in order to assist you to understand all the changes which we did. Catherine was mentioning that we are really trying to give you background and history of the ICPs in ComFrame, to point out all the changes which you're making and giving it a rationale for you. You will see it won't be perfect that we can give you all the track changes text, because that actually is with this integration not anymore possible or not anymore readable, but we do our best that it's clear that you see where this text is coming from and how it has been revised. With that, I would like actually to end here the presentation. I would like to give you the chance to ask any questions you may have or comments you may have. Please. Rob, please.
Thanks, Urs. Just to understand better the prior...
Rob, sorry, just can you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, Rob Essen, distinguished fellow. Just a joke. The prior hierarchy had standards, thou shalt, parameters, which were probably thou should strongly consider, and guidance which had about the level of prescriptiveness of a fireside chat. If you are putting the parameters into the standard, is there a danger that the ComFrame standards become more prescriptive than they were previously, and how is the SMART task force ensuring that that not too many parameters which were previously not mandatory suddenly become mandatory?
Sure. So, excuse me, when the working groups were asked to kind of make the changes to the structure, they were also asked to consider the parameters and whether they did rise to a level of similar hierarchy of the ICPs, where they should be a standard, or whether they made more sense as guidance. So it wasn't just a simple, everything was automatically elevated. They had to go through and figure out, one, was this still actually applicable, given the things we've learned in the revision process? If so, should it be a standard? If it needed to be a standard, did it need to be worded clearer or better to make it more like a standard? Or, you know, if it was just kind of more heavier guidance, then maybe just consider making it guidance. So it was supposed to be kind of a thoughtful process to eliminate the parameter material, but make sure it went in the right place given the direction we were going. So.
Are there any more questions, please?
Yes, my name is Kei Kato of Tokyo Marine. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I have not too much into contents, but some logistic question and request regarding the March consultation. The March consultation, according to your explanation, effectively includes 10 ICP articles, and the one in July and August has about 4. But the same consultation period of 2 months. About the March consultation, I'd be grateful if you could give a ballpark figure of how many pages and how many questions you expect. It doesn't have to be firm. And also, as a request, if it's possible to extend any 2 months consultation period due to its volume, especially for non-English countries such as mine, because I have to translate everything into Japanese for our P&C Japanese industry. Also, if you can, I'd like another additional question about the recovery and resolution planning ICP part. How much of the last year's informal consultation was reflected into the upcoming consultation? That's it.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. Maybe I'm starting with the latter question, which is maybe even the more difficult one. I think we have internally seriously addressed all the comments received on this, let's say, informal consultation or request for feedback in respect of ICP 12 and the ComFrame, associated ComFrame material. And as we have said, we are not making this public because it was a request for feedback. But we have tried really to address and discuss all the points made, and not to say that we have taken up all the comments, but we have seriously considered them, and we hope that with the public consultation, then that gives you another chance actually to revisit and go back your comments in both on the ICP level as on the ComFrame level, as the ComFrame text. In terms of the volume, I actually don't think it's that much of a volume. Of course, it sounds quite a lot, but it's fair to say that we have not only streamlined the ComFrame text, but also the ICP text. We have really tried to, going also for the principle-based, we have tried to being not too prescriptive, taking out also a lot of guidance. So that has actually quite shortened and should be actually much more digestible. And in that respect also for you to respond to that. But don't ask me about any specific number of pages or of paragraphs that I cannot give you a response. But I think it's really doable within the 60 days. And I think I was thinking about the topic which we get back to probably in a few minutes. That was much more work intensive to reply to the consultation draft of ICS.
Fair enough, but if it is voluminous, please consider an extension.
Okay, we will.
Thank you.
Okay. More comments, questions? Michelle, please.
Michelle Rogers with the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies. Just a quick question I had about the additional questions that will be provided to the companies, and the GSIs and the potential IAIGs. I was curious if those will be open for others to comment on. Some of our members don't engage directly, and I just was curious how you were planning to deal with that.
They are integrated in the tool, and please feel free to comment on those as well.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Other questions? Mark, please.
Thanks, Urs. Mark Radis with Zurich Insurance. We have the IMF at the table, I understand. So my question is, how does the IMF intend to use the new body of ICPs now that it will include ComFrame, and what's the time frame of applying that to FSAPs?
Is that a question to IMF, or maybe I can also give IAIS view on this one first? I think we have heard about this adoption date of the ICPs, which means actually that the adoption will only take place in 2019, and as long as it's not adopted, it will not form a basis of an FSAP. So that is clear. And after that, once the ICPs are adopted, of course, they will build the basis for an FSAP. In respect to ComFrame, that is not yet decided how that will go into the future. But please, if you like to add something.
Just as you are absolutely correct. You have just revised you have summarized few ICP principles to understand the FSAP, which have been approved in agreement with the IAIS last September, if I'm correct. Surely before they will not be approved officially from IAIS, will not taken on board in the FSAP assessment. So when ComFrame principle will be adopted according to the ICP rules, or surely they will be followed by FSAP procedure, but not before that, official approval by IAIS.
Welcome. Other questions? George?
Thanks. I had a question about the process that's going to go into this. I mean, right now you have a policy for consultation of stakeholders on supervisory material. And I wondered if you're going to go through all the steps of introducing the material as it's presented for consultation, going through a resolution of comments and all that, just trying to get a sense of the massive volume here and watching this play out over consecutive months where you're going to still be resolving comments on some material and launching consultations on new material, which you may be reconciling with different groups, but just being aware, following up on the previous comment, of the volume and the need to coordinate that on this end as well.
I think your last point is correct about the what you said about the working groups. There are different working groups actually involved in that, and from that perspective, I think the workload is shared. In respect of the consultation, yes, we will actually do the full consultation process as foreseen. So that's also that we, for example, will do at the launch of the publication a public background session, and we still haven't decided exactly how that will be organized because there are several working groups involved, and if we are putting all in one background session, then that might last maybe a few hours, which is also maybe not ideal. So we have to fine-tune that, how we actually do that, but we will adhere to our policy for consultation of stakeholders, so that's unchanged, and from that we will provide the full transparency and also in respect of our responses, the resolutions. So from that respect, you should expect the same as if it's only one ICP which we would consult.
Okay, my vote would be to come back here if you want to do a stakeholder meeting again, so just for the record.
Good afternoon, Robert Neal with ACLI. One question also about process with the June global seminar pending soon after the comments would be due on the ComFrame and ICP consultations. And this may be subject to more discussion at your February meetings, but is there any detail or any foresight of what you anticipate the global seminar to include in this area or otherwise at this point?
We haven't actually detailed. We have some ideas, but we haven't come up with the exact plan about the global seminar. But we gladly take this up as an opportunity actually to exchange on these consultations.
Excellent. And I would also echo the request for additional time to comment on numerous consultations if they are voluminous. So would appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. You all seem to be afraid of the volume, but it's actually not that much. The FSTC members were able to read it within the 7 days as a preparation for our meeting afterwards. More questions? Next 2 months. Lance just telling me that we should have out the program for the global seminar within the next 2 months. So then you would see what exactly is expected by you for the global seminar. With that, I think we conclude here this session, and which gives us 3/4 of an hour time for going back to the ICS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Liz, we'll pick up with you if you still have a comment.
Thank you very much. So I had some comments on the, primarily the market-adjusted valuation presentation before lunch. And it builds on some of the comments that I had this morning related to the integration of the ICS and ComFrame and looking at those as complementary tools. So I had jotted down some of the points from the slides in the MAV approach. For instance, an adjustment to the risk-free rate aiming to remove artificial volatility, described as volatility that does not reflect the true nature of the activities of the insurer or its risk profile. And what that implies is that the adjustment will reveal volatility that is related to the nature of the insurance company's activities and its risk profile. So the way that that can happen is if the adjustment to the risk-free rate is appropriately defined. And you've heard other companies and associations describe the idea of a pure approach to looking at the discount rate adjustment, so an own assets approach and a reference portfolio approach that are well-defined and sort of clean, as opposed to a cobbling together and layering on of adjustments of different pieces of those. And I think that's really important, because what the proposed blended approach does is really introduce several different sources of asymmetry between assets and liabilities that will get masked. And if you have a primary colors approach, as people are calling it, that allows you to look at these pure discounting adjustments individually, then you'll be able to better tease out what is true volatility versus artificial volatility. So some of the sources of the artificial volatility as we see it are the lack of an appropriately defined reference portfolio. I know we tested a reference portfolio last year. If a reference portfolio is too broadly defined and doesn't include actual market participant peers, then it's going to create noise when it's applied to companies for discounting certain liabilities. So an improvement to option 1 from last year is needed, as opposed to throwing away the entire idea of an option 1 pure reference portfolio approach as we see it. And the other key issue is the idea of an application ratio. So the application ratios are essentially an arbitrary haircut to a spread, whether that spread is defined by own assets or a reference portfolio. It's still not clear to me, after years of discussion around the discount rate, where this application ratio comes from, what the rationale for it is, other than a view that there is some risk that a company may not be able to earn a spread, but the calibration of those is not really clear. It seems highly arbitrary, and certainly the nature of the adjustment is pro-cyclical. As spreads change, your assets are going to move in relation to those spreads. Your liabilities are going to move in relation to the haircut spreads, where that haircut is completely arbitrarily defined. And so application ratios simply don't fit in this idea of having an adjustment where the volatility is meant to be an adjustment that avoids artificial volatility. That kind of adjustment will create artificial volatility. And what that means is companies will be holding capital associated with that artificial mismatch. And that capital will be pro-cyclical, and that capital has downstream impacts to the actual capital requirements, because it will exacerbate the stresses, for instance, interest rate stresses and longevity stresses that apply to long-term business. So I guess my point is that the idea of having a blended approach with various provisions like application ratios is going to create artificial volatility and pro-cyclicality that is going to have serious impacts to the meaningfulness of the ICS, and having more of a pure approach to evaluating an appropriately defined own assets approach and appropriately defined reference portfolio, I think will shed a lot of light on some of the concerns that you have with respect to the discount rate. And lastly, just to reiterate something that I mentioned this morning, the integration between the ICS and ComFrame. So given supervisory concerns around insurers' investment behavior and ALM discipline, it seems that the discounting approaches, in particular an application ratio kind of adjustment to the discount rate, are aimed at addressing supervisory concerns relating to that investment behavior and ALM discipline, where more appropriate and effective tools that don't have these other consequences for the solvency balance sheet can be found within ComFrame and are likely already performed by all IAIGs. I think I certainly speak for Prudential, but probably other companies, in that we would much prefer an appropriate discount rate and the additional tools that provide transparency and visibility into our ALM discipline. Reports, policies, procedures, first, second, third line approaches to managing that risk within the company, as opposed to embedding that through opaque conservatism in the capital requirements through the discount rate.
Just a clarification, option 1 will still be tested, because option 1 will be part of the blended option, and we'll find a way to collect everything on option 1 within the blended option. So there will be the top up will be captured as well.
Right, I know
So
that
what
the
would
blended...
So what would be quite important for us would be what refinement to option 1 would you like to be embedded? And I think that's where you can help us.
Yes, and we certainly will have, can share thoughts on that. I think what we would like to see is a reference portfolio approach on its own. This primary colors idea of an own assets approach on its own without application ratio adjustments and things. Similarly, a reference portfolio approach on its own without application ratios and such adjustments. I think that if you have an appropriately defined reference portfolio that reflects a true sort of peer market participant investment portfolio, that will probably look very similar to an owned assets with guardrails approach, again, provided that the guardrails are appropriately defined. But as soon as you start introducing these adjustments like arbitrary haircuts to spreads, where the spreads are already reflective of either the company or a peer group, then you end up with this inherent mismatch that has all of these second-order issues like pro-cyclicality and overstating capital requirements.
Maddie, did you want to? What's
at least to me, the different haircuts, whether from risk-free to whatever it is that higher, whether it's blended with the different applications ratios in different buckets or the AA that's lower than single A, it's due to the mismatch, because you start with the asset and liability mismatch, and then the level of that mismatch when rates and spreads change is uncertain. So to me at least, that's the source of the haircut, because I think if it was perfectly matched with no uncertainty, then I agree that it should be the portfolio earned rate. But when any deviation from that, then I think there's a degree of haircut. And I think to me that's the source of the different application ratios or the less than the portfolio earned rate.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's where I think these other tools that provide greater visibility for supervisors into ALM discipline would be really useful, because the investment portfolio, whether it's the company's own or a well-defined peer group, that investment portfolio already reflects the nature of liabilities. There's a lot of careful asset liability management decision-making that goes into selecting those assets due to the liquidity and duration of the liabilities to begin with. So having an additional haircut on the spread is essentially double counting that notion, which is already embedded in the way insurance companies invest.
But no matter how good the ALM discipline, it's no match for matching, because especially at the long end of liabilities where there cannot be any matching.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, where these additional tools I think would be really useful, because you'll see through the ALM discipline and all the reporting that goes into that, granular duration reporting and cash flow reporting and things that shed light on how insurance companies monitor the liability duration relative to the asset duration. And the other tool, if you will, that addresses that mismatch is the capital requirement stresses themselves. So we have a severe interest rate stress in the ICS that applies to both assets and liabilities, and it penalizes a duration mismatch between assets and liabilities. If you're perfectly matched, then that stress is significantly less, right, than when you have liabilities longer than your assets, or any kind of mismatch. So again, it's not that we're saying that there isn't that potential to have mismatch or that there aren't risks. It's just making sure that the tools to address them are appropriate and don't have these hopefully unintended inappropriate consequences, like the pro-cyclicality of capital requirements and what that does in terms of creating a more punitive ICS overall. So, having an inherent mismatch in your assets and liabilities from the pure valuation perspective, that then exacerbates the severity, the impact of the stress, of the interest rate stress itself. So there are these downstream impacts. And, the risk is that companies will then seek to avoid these outcomes in the ICS by avoiding the products and the associated long-term investment that gives rise to the artificial outcomes. So, it's important to understand asset and liability matching or mismatches that are inherent in the business model and how those, and holding appropriate capital for those. But we're very concerned about measures that are well-intentioned relative to concerns, but have unintended consequences in terms of overstating capital or overstating the volatility of the balance sheet relative to the inherent economics of the business model.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Good comments. Are there other questions from this morning's session? Any comments from anyone at the table? Questions? The stakeholders? Well, hearing none, I know I found this very productive, and I hope you did as well. Thank you very much for your input, and you'll be hearing more from us as we continue to narrow down the options and make decisions, and we'll get that information out to you. Thank you.